Okay, so I was talking about creating procedures before we went for the break. Um, so I just want to show you a couple of examples of some stored procedures. Um, the first procedure is just a standard stored procedure, which is going to display information from the department table. This procedure will not require any parameter. And all it's going to do is to display the departments according to what is in the table. Okay, so I'll go ahead. I think that I've already created this procedure, so I'll just change it a bit and say procedure list departs. So that's the name I'm going to give to this procedure. So I'll go ahead and create this procedure. And then I can now use this procedure to display the departments. And as you can see, I have the results there. The departments from the table are listed there, 16 rows altogether. So that's how you execute, create and execute a procedure. You can also use parameterized procedures. This procedure, which we saw from the previous section, is one where we want to list employees based on the title. And it's going to, first of all, retrieve information from the table and then only display results based on that which is going to match the parameter that has been passed on to the procedure. So it can have, say, to design, sales manager, and so on. Okay. Another example, and this one is one which uses table valued parameter. So the first step, I said, is to create a table if you haven't created a table. But as it is, I've already created a table called branch. And if you check there, I have a table called branch. And in this table, I have a list of branches. And I want to use this table as an input for a parameter. So first I create the table. And then the second step is to create a user data type. a user-defined data type. So this is my user data type, which I've created. Which says you use the keyword create type, then followed by the name that you want to assign to it, to the data type, and I'm creating it as a table. And then in brackets, I put the columns which are going to make up that table. So once I create the data type, the next step is to now create a procedure which is going to take this procedure is going to use a data type which I've created in this step as an input parameter. So I start just the normal way, create procedure, and that's the name of the procedure. After that, I specify the parameter, and in this case, that's the name of the parameter I'm using, and I'm using the data type is N type, which I created there, and I've set to read only so that this procedure will not change the contents of this table that I've created here, okay? We'll just retrieve the information from the table. So the way I'm going to use the information from that table is I'm going to use it to insert into the data type I'm using is N type, which is read only, okay? And I'm going to insert this information based on what I've provided there. So when you are using a table as a parameter, you follow the normal procedure. I've created the parameter using the data type I've defined. Then I'm inserting into this table, I'm inserting these values, and I'm using a select statement to retrieve the data from this parameter, okay? Remember, this table, I created this table and I've defined a data type based on that table, and I want to take that information, and that's what I'm going to insert into the this table here. Once I do that, then I can go ahead and execute the stored procedure that I've just created. So here, I have declared a variable called table test as N type, and in it, I'm going to insert data into it. This is the data I'm going to use to test it. And so I'll just go ahead and execute this. Okay, sorry, I need to make some changes because I've already entered this information. So I'll put that as 3, and that will be 4. Okay, so for me to insert that, I've set the primary key. So I need to use different values because I already have that information in it. So when I'm declaring a variable, which is going to be used as a parameter, this one, of this n type, the data type that I've created, and I'm going to use that as the basis or the source or the parameter to enter data into this table, okay? So when I do that, then I can go ahead and execute this procedure. I need to make some changes to this. Okay, so when I do that, I'm inserting data in these two values, and I can check by running the select statement. Then I'll see that I've entered number 5 and number 6. Okay. Essentially, I've used the same values. I can change and maybe say accountant. I'll say 7, and that would be 8. And then will be mechanics. Okay. So I execute that. Then I can check now. So I've added those two. So I'm using a table as a data type to insert data into a table in form of a table valued parameter. Okay. Okay. Basically, that's the essence of stored procedures. Now, just one or two examples. Once you have created procedures, you can change the procedures by using the alter procedure statement. Okay, so if you check in the procedures, we are looking for this one. So we go to stored procedures. That's a procedure. Okay. If we need to change it, we can use the alter procedure like that. Here we are going to change the contents of this procedure. And so you say alter procedure followed by the current name of the procedure. We are not renaming the procedure, we are just modifying it. Begin, then we are going to display department ID. In the previous example, we are displaying the department ID only. Now we are going to add the department name. So you can execute that and change this procedure. So this procedure is now going to have 2 columns in the output. If you realize that maybe you need to add a 3rd one or maybe 2 more fields, again, you can still use this statement, alter procedure, and then you indicate exactly how you want the procedure to be run, and then you execute it. Once you do that, then you can go ahead and use it, and you'll be able to see the new changes. Once you have done that, you can delete a procedure by simply using drop procedure like that. And when you go back to procedures, you'll find that the procedure has been removed. This one, okay, so it has been removed. Okay, so basically that's about creating procedures. Are there any questions? Okay, the last part.
So,
Yes, yes, yes.
well, there where it says N type, what does that mean? Like
Sorry,
press
come
type
again?
N. Where it says N type.
N type, yes. What about it?
I don't understand when you say create.
Okay.
When you
Okay, let me show you what I started. We said that if you want to use a stored procedure where you use a table valued parameter, the first step will be to create the table on which you are going to base the parameter, or you use an existing table. The next step is, step number 2 is to create a user data type. And that's what we have done. We have created a new data type over on, which is essentially a table. Then in the third step, we have created a procedure that takes a parameter of the data type that we have created in step number 2, which is a table. And then we can execute it. So let me go back. So yeah, so the first step, I created a new table called branch. Then in the second step, I created a new data type using this statement, create type. I said after the keyword type, you put the name that you want to give to the new data type, to your user-defined data type. And this data type I'm creating, it's going to be a table. So I've added this part as table.
Yes.
And then in brackets, I define the columns that are going to make up this table that I'm creating the data type for. Okay, does that answer your question? Then after that, I'm using this data type which I've created there. I'm using it there to create the procedure. I'm creating a procedure, and there's a new, this is the parameter I'm going to use for this procedure. Now this parameter, just like other parameters, are supposed to have a data type. And the data type I'm using is this one, which is the user-defined data type.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, any other question before I go to functions? Okay, I need to finish this today. Okay, this is just for something I need to mention in passing. When you want to return values from a stored procedure, You can also return values as an output from stored procedures. The values can be returned to the calling application through parameters, or to the user who is viewing, who is interacting with your database using the Management Studio. To specify a parameter as an output parameter, you use the output keyword. So when creating the stored procedure, you have to include the output keyword because we said the default is input. So you have to include that. Then the output keyword has to be specified both in the create procedure and execute statements. Now, you can get questions like this in the exam or in a test where in the create procedure, quite okay, they have included the output keyword. But when executing the procedure, they just say execute procedure, then the name of the procedure and the parameter, which is going to be the output, and they leave out the output keyword. That is going to give you an error message. It's not going to work because this keyword has to appear both in the create procedure statement and in the execute procedure statements. If the output keyword is omitted, the procedure will be executed, but will not return any value. So depending on where you have left out this keyword, if you leave out the keyword in the create procedure statement, you get an error message. If you leave out the execute, if you use executes procedure statement, then you leave out the output keyword, but you have included the parameter. The procedure is going to be executed quite okay. But what you are going to notice is you are not going to get the results. It's just going to execute and quit. Okay. So when you come across questions to do with executing parameterized queries as stored procedures, always remember that if you are going to have output parameters, the output keyword must appear in both the create procedure statement and execute procedure statement. You can't leave out the output keyword in either of those statements. Okay, so that's the syntax where you have the create procedure followed by the procedure name, then the parameters that you want to use for output. The parameter name followed by the data type and also the keyword output. Then you put the SQL statements that are going to make the body of your stored procedure. You can also include this statement, the keyword return followed by the value. Return, that is, means to produce as output. Okay. Okay, so I have got an example, which is here. And I'll just leave it to you to go through. And if you have problems, then we can discuss. But basically what we have is the create procedure statement being used to create this procedure called PRC, get employee detail. and it has a number of parameters. There's employee ID, imp ID as integer, department name as char with a length of 50, output, shift ID, int as output. So this one is just an input parameter. Then these two are the ones which are going to be produced as output as in the results set. That is the department name and the shift ID. Then in this statement, we are first checking if the employee ID, which has been passed on to as a parameter, does exist in the table. If it exists, that's when we want to now execute this select statement. Otherwise, what is going to happen is if the employee ID, which has been passed on, is not in the table, it's just going to come to the else part and display a 1. It's going to produce 1 as a result. Okay, you can also call procedures from another procedure. That is, you can create one procedure and create a second procedure, which is going to depend on the first procedure. Okay. Sometimes you need to use values returned by the procedure in another procedure. And for this, you can execute or call one procedure from another procedure. A procedure that calls or executes another procedure is known as the calling procedure. And the procedure that is called or executed by another is called a called procedure. You can also execute a procedure from another procedure if you need to use the functionality provided in one procedure into another. Remember, a procedure can have some programming logic. So if you need to use the same programming logic in another procedure, there's no need for you to repeat the same code. You can just include the name of the procedure that has the programming logic already in it. Okay. Again, there's an example here. This new procedure is calling the procedure that we had created earlier on. I think this one. So we have this new procedure, and you can see how it's being called. You include the execute statement. And remember that first procedure had the 3 parameters, 1 input, which was employee ID, and 2 output parameters, department name and shift ID. Okay, so this is calling this procedure, which we had created at first, inside this other procedure. So that's how you call a procedure inside another procedure. Okay, the last part of this is to do with functions. Now, do not get confused here. We have looked at some functions such as sum, count, and so on. Those are system functions. They come as part of SQL standard. But you as the programmer or as a database administrator can create your own function. These functions are the ones which are referred to as user-defined functions. Okay. A user-defined function is similar to a stored procedure, but there are some minor differences. A user-defined function is a database object that contains a number of transact SQL statements that are going to accept some parameters, perform some action, and return the results of those actions as values. To return the value, the returned value can either be a single scalar value or a result set. A single scalar value simply means you have a function which is calculating the monthly pay salary for employees. And once you provide maybe the rate at which someone is paid per hour, then it's going to produce the result as a value, which is the salary per month. But some functions can produce results in form of tables. Okay, and those are what we are referring to as producing results set. So some procedures will only produce a single value as an answer. Those are called single scalar value. Others will produce a set of results like a table, and there are slightly different ways in which you are going to create these functions depending on whether they are single scalar or they produce a result set. Now, the difference between a user-defined function and a procedure lies in the fact that user-defined functions have limited scope compared to stored procedures. That is, how much you can use them. A user-defined function can be used when you need programming logic that does not make permanent changes to the database object outside the function. You have a function which is maybe calculating the pay how much someone is supposed to be paid per week, and you are going to refer to some tables in your database. If you want to just refer to obtain values from those tables, then you cannot make changes to those tables using user-defined functions. So what I mean is, for example, you cannot modify a database table from a function. Okay. So the user-defined function cannot perform changes which are going to modify, for example, the structure of the database or have an effect on database objects. That's a limitation. That's the difference between stored procedures and functions. Now, of course, another difference is that when you are creating, instead of using create procedure, for a function, you will use the statement create function. The other parts are going to be similar. Okay. A few things about creating functions. User-defined functions can contain the following components: the function name with an optional schema or owner name. I'm sure we should be familiar with this by now. Schema, that's a logical partitioning of the database. which can be assigned to different individuals with different rights and permissions. A user-defined function can include input parameter name and data types. So apart from the function name, you can also have input parameters. And these parameters can also be accompanied by some options which might be applicable to those input parameters. For example, we used read only in one of the procedures that we made. That's an option that can be applied to some parameters. A user-defined function can also include a returned parameter and data type. So you are going to have to return parameter, data type, and an optional name. Okay, so some user-defined functions, you may want to include a return parameter, which is optional. And again, those parameters may come with some options which are going to modify the way the parameters are used in the function. And after that, you are going to have a set of SQL statements, transact SQL statements, which are going to be the programming logic for your function. Is it calculating a value? Is it retrieving values from a table using a select statement, and so on? Those are going to be included in the function. So in a function, you can have some of these or all of them. The benefits of using user-defined functions are similar to the benefits of using procedures. The first one is they allow for modular programming. That is, you can create functions which will perform certain calculations, and then you can use those calculations in other parts of your database, such as in other procedures or in other functions. Modular means you create your program such that it is made up of consists of separate components called modules. The idea is that when your program is modular, it becomes easier to troubleshoot, because you know if an error occurs concerning this calculation, that calculation is only implemented in one part of your program. So you are able to go to the correct module and check the calculation. The other parts of your program are going to just make use of what you have already implemented in that module. Okay. So you can create a function once, store it in a database, and then you can call it as many times as you need in your program. The second benefit is that it allows for faster execution. Just like stored procedures, user-defined functions reduce the compilation cost, that is the time and resource utilization of T-SQL code, by caching. That is, once the code has been executed once, it is kept in memory, and then it can be reused whenever you need to use the code as many times as you need until it has been removed from memory. The third benefit is that they can improve network performance by reducing the traffic, network traffic. We saw this again when we were looking at stored procedures. Okay, so here is an example of how you create, so the schema of creating syntax of creating functions, user-defined functions. You have create function, then the schema name, function name, then parameter or a number of parameters that you are going to include. As you remember, let's say use for aliases when you want to use different names, okay? Type schema name and parameter data type. As you can see, these are in square brackets, meaning that these are optional. You can also have equal to default when you want to set the default value. So you can have a number of parameters according to what you need for that function. After you have declared the parameters that are going to be used in that function, then you put the word return data type. What kind of the result which is going to come from the function, the data type. And take note, it returns with S. And then you can apply a number of options such as schema binding, encryption, execute as, and so on. Then the word as, then begin, and this is where you put the statements that are going to make up your functions. Once you have performed once you have performed the required action, you have to include the return expression statement. Now, just take note, this one is different from this one. This one is return, this one is returns. This one is followed by the data type. This one is just expression and the word end. Okay, let me look at a few things. So here I've briefly explained what those items in the syntax are: the schema name, function name, parameter name, type schema name. We say this is the data type of the parameter and optionally the schema to which it belongs. Default, that is when you want to set the default value for the parameter so that if the user doesn't provide the parameter value, doesn't provide the value, you have set a value which will automatically be used in its place. Return data type, that's the return value of a scalar user-defined function for a user-defined function. Execute as is a clause that is used when you want to allow a user to be granted all necessary rights to execute the function. Some functions may need to access parts of a database or like tables for which the current user has no permissions or rights. So if they are going to execute that function, you need to grant them the rights necessary to access those parts of your database. Creating scalar functions. Scalar functions accept a single parameter and return a single value of the type specified in the returns clause. This one. I need to emphasize this. Is this. It's this part. Okay, not this one. Okay. In the returns clause. Okay. So a scalar function is one where it's going to return only one value as a result of the calculation or the execution of the steps that have been defined in the function. A scalar function, a scalar function can return any data type except these types: text, end text, image, cursor, and timestamp. It can have maybe varchar, it can have int, big int, small int, and all those other data types that we looked at, except these data types. Okay. Here is an example. I'm running out of time. Okay, so the first step is to create a function. So I say create function, and this function is going to use the schema called human resources, and this is the name of the function that I'm creating, monthly salary. And in the brackets, I put the parameter, which is @period, and I'm using the float data type. And it's going to return the data type float. Then what it's going to do is just to return the result of this rate times 8 times 30. That is assuming 8 hours per day, 30 days per week, per month. And then you can execute this by using, I'm declaring a variable and then setting a value to that, and then I print the rate. Okay, I'll stop there. The last part has to do with table valued function, and I'll ask you to go through that and we can discuss this.